The world contains pockets where unexplained events occur, locations that draw repeated reports across decades. Picture deserts with unexplained flashing lights, or forests where unfamiliar animals appear at the edge of campsites. A trail marked by clusters of disappearances. When hikers, residents, researchers, and travelers record dates, coordinates, weather conditions, photographs, and audio that all align across independent accounts. Some places host multiple types of paranormal reports on a regular basis. Where can you think of where has unexplained disappearances, cryptid encounters, UFO sightings, a hidden city, and ties to the lost city of Atlantis? Welcome to Mount Shasta. Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path. High strangeness zones describe a pattern of reports in which different kinds of anomalies appear together in a single place and over time. Witnesses describe combinations that include unexplained lights, episodes of missing time, sudden mechanical failures, and phenomena resembling poltergeist activity. Researchers who use the term point to concurrent, varied reports rather than an isolated sighting, and they treat those clusters as a distinct category for investigation. The phrase traces back to work in the mid-20th century ufology. J. Allen Hynek used language to capture cases that exceeded simple craft sightings, and John Keel brought the idea into popular awareness through investigative reporting and books that documented complex episodes of overlapping phenomenon. Keel's fieldwork in the 1960s and 1970s recorded not only visual sightings but also phone calls, physical disturbances, and eyewitness accounts. Descriptions collected by investigators show recurring elements, such as reports of lost hours, objects moving without clear cause, voices or impressions that witnesses attribute to external sources, and figures whose behaviors confound standard categories. These elements appear in combinations that defy neat classification, producing case files where a single night can yield a light in the sky, followed by a missing persons report, and then a household disturbance. So why do certain regions generate these type of continuous stories? One frequently cited example is Skinwalker Ranch, often referred to in early press as the Sherman Ranch after the family whose accounts reached local newspapers in the mid-1990s. The property drew national attention when entrepreneur Robert Bigelow purchased it in 1996 and funded organized investigations. The public records include the Sherman family's statements, subsequent interviews, surveillance footage released in books and documents, and years of reporting that catalog alleged cattle injuries, unexplained lights, and other irregular incidents. Another site that has appeared repeatedly in historical files is Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the first widely reported Mothman sightings were recorded on November 15, 1966, by Roger and Linda Scarsbury, and Steve and Mary Mallet near TNT area. Newspapers collected dozens of reports through 1967, and the sequence of sightings became entangled with the Silver Bridge collapse on December 15th of 1967. Across the Atlantic, Randlesham Forest became a UFO story that people couldn't ignore after a series of strange lights showed up in December of 1980 near the RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwater, and these weren't random bystanders who witnessed this. They were trained military personnel. More accounts followed, and the whole thing got harder to explain away. Just like Skinwalker Ranch or Point Pleasant, Randlesham is one of those places with a long, stubborn history of weirdness. Investigators keep coming back to it because the patterns that they witness there don't fade away, no matter how many times the stories get picked apart. Reports tied to Mount Shasta cover a range of phenomenon. There are unexplained disappearances recorded by local authorities, sights of large, elusive animals on the mountain slope, repeated observations of bright, unexplained lights moving over the ridge lines, and episodes of electronic equipment failing without any clear cause. Visitors and residents describe sudden disorientation, brief lapses in remembered time, and encounters that leave physical traces alongside striking personnel. Mount Shasta rises in the North Californian Cascade Range, anchored in Siskiyou County and visible from Interstate 5 as travelers move between Redding and Oregon borders. The summit reaches 14,179 feet, and the mountain's typography prominence measures roughly 9,822 feet, making it one of the most visually dominant peaks in the region. The town of Mount Shasta sits on the southern flank, and the smaller communities of Weed lies to the west. Both towns serve as a staging point for visitors who come to the mountain for work, recreation, or even pilgrimage. The slopes fall into the Shasta Trinity National Forest and present as a sequence of ecological bands. There's the lower elevations that have ponderosa pine and Douglas fir. The mid-slopes give way to red fir, and the high reaches open into meadows, Tulsa fields, and permanent snowfields. Creeks cut narrow ravines through dense strands, and the terrain shifts from packed volcanic scree to glacier ice on the upper flanks. Trails thread through strands of cedar and mountain hemlocks, cross streams, and climb towards ridge lines where the air thins and the landscape narrows to rock and snow. Mount Shasta is a stratovolcano whose most striking feature is its solitary cone. Where other mountains form chains and ridgelines, Shasta rises alone from the Shasta Valley and the surrounding plateaus, an enormous peak visible for dozens of miles. The mountain's isolation on the landscape makes its profile unmistakable, and, to many who pass beneath it, oddly out of step with the ranges that usually crowd the horizon. Where the Andes or the Rockies are a formation of several different mountainous ranges, Shasta stands alone. It's very unique to this area. For generations, indigenous communities have been closely tied to the mountain, including Shasta, the Wintu, and the Modoc, and of course the people from Pitt River. To them, this is a sacred place, and they have identifying spirit beings that are associated with its slopes. They also include wardings and give guidance as to how to approach the mountain. Elders and storytellers pass on accounts that refer to the peak as the locus of power, as a site where humans and non-human presence meet. Several tribal traditions speak of sky beings and creator figures who act on or above the mountain. One narrative centers a figure named Skell, who is described as the spirit chief of the above world. He descends to Mount Shasta to confront Lau, a spirit of the below world associated with Mount Mesame. According to the story, Skell and Lau exchange fire and rock in a battle that kind of explains the volcanic upheaval in the region. Eventually, the two men sacrifice themselves to end the conflict, and Skell buries Lau beneath what becomes Crater Lake. In these stories, Skell is an agent who moves between the sky and the summit. Shasta tribal traditions preserve a figure called the Old Man Above, or man who inhabits the summit, and he descends the summit to speak with people. The Old Man Above appears in creation narratives and in cautionary tales that instruct listeners about proper conduct on the mountain. One Shasta tale describes how Old Man Above taught people where to find resources or how to avoid danger. And in another, there's a hunter who ignored a warning and returned with a story of sudden misfortune attributed to the summit spirit. These accounts function as both origin myth and practical guidance for movement across the landscape. Most importantly, the elders speak of a firm boundary on the mountain. Where the trees thin and the alpine meadows begin, this area belongs to the sky people, and you are never to enter that area. There are some pretty severe consequences if you do too. You might become disoriented and fall ill, or you could encounter sudden dangerous weather that forces you to retreat back down the mountain. These are just some of the original stories that are tied to the mountain in ancient history, but over time, newer stories started to pile up. In September 2011, a 3-year-old named only in reports as John Doe wanders away from his family campsite at Fowler Campground near McLeod Falls on the lower slopes of Mount Shasta. A huge search is launched, and pretty quickly, the child's dog was found. He was soaked and curled up on a bank of a vast, rocky stretch of the McCloud River, and searchers worried that the boy may have fallen in and that the current had taken him. Volunteers, sheriff deputies, and firefighters spread out along the trails and riverbeds, flashlights cutting through cedar and fir, and at around 12:45 a.m., a deputy wandering with a canine heard a faint cry and found the boy hiding under a bush. He was cold and scared but alive, and the scene that followed, hot drinks, blankets, and neighbors trading relieved smiles, was like something out of a small-town miracle. But this was odd that the boy was found there because that location had been searched thoroughly several times prior to his discovery. A few weeks later, the toddler is sitting at his grandmother's kitchen. He calls her Cappy, and he calmly tells her, "I like you better than the other Cappy." His grandma is confused and asks him, who's the other Grandma Cappy? He goes on to tell her that when he was missing, he ended up in a cave with a woman, and that woman looked just like her. But he adds she was a robot. He tells her that this robot grandma examined his stomach and told him that he had come from outer space and was placed inside his mom's belly. She then handed him a scrap piece of paper and asked him to defecate on it. But the little boy said he couldn't do it because he didn't have to go. After that, the robot grandma takes him back to the river and tells him to wait under the bush. Grandma Cappy relays the story to the boy's parents, who have already heard it, and the dad just kind of brushes it off, saying it's just a toddler's wild imagination. But Grandma Cappy is a little weirded out by this because a few weeks before her grandson had gone missing, she too had taken a trip to Mount Shasta with a friend. Her friend had slept in a trailer while she slept outside in a tent. One morning, she wakes up face down in the dirt, and she can feel this sore puncture mark on the back of her neck. She feels sick and disoriented, and she has no clear memory of how she ended up in the dirt. She decides that this was a bug bite of some sort, but the thing is, her friend also has a puncture mark on the back of their neck and is also feeling sick, even though this person was asleep inside of the trailer. A lot of people have come up with the theory that the mark on Grandma Cappy's neck was a form of DNA extraction used to create a doppelganger, or a mimic of the grandmother. Folkloric readers call the figure a trickster or a shape-shifting being that borrows human form to lure or test people. Overall, it's a pretty unsettling story, and what we do know is that the boy for sure went missing. It was widely reported at the time, but the grandma's side of the story is a little more unclear. Her account is told by a person online claiming to be the boy's grandmother, but we have no real way of verifying this, as his parents chose to remain anonymous. This is just one of many cases linked to the missing 411 framework, which highlights clusters of unexplained vanishes in wilderness areas, unusual recovery locations, and reoccurring odd details. Tons of people go missing from Mount Shasta frequently, and most are found shortly afterwards, usually having fallen off the trail. But there are a few cases where a person reappears in some of the strangest ways. One way people have come up with to explain these weird relocations or reappearances is portals. People love the idea of portals because it's a tidy answer for weird, scary gaps in a story. Mount Shasta already comes with a built-in mystery resume, old legends, remote ridgelines, and a long list of odd reports. So when a disappearance or an unexplained mark shows up, the portal idea slides into place like it's been waiting there all along. But the idea isn't as crazy as you might think. Scientists have measured real fascinating phenomenon that sounds portal adjacent if you don't know the jargon. Space physicians observe magnetic reconnective events that briefly connect magnetic domains for tiny particles. Physicists have math for wormholes, but those are theoretical and need exotic conditions to exist. More recently, NASA has discovered what they call X points. These are specific sites in a magnetic field where opposite lines reconnect briefly, opening a channel that allows for particles and energies to rush through. In other words, a portal. Now, these are short-lived. However, NASA has recently discovered some near the sun that have been stable for long periods of time. Geologists mapped seismic activity, caves, and magnetic quirks around volcanoes like Mount Shasta, but none of that gives us a tested mechanism for human-sized doorways that swallow people and spit them out elsewhere. Currently, the area has about 36 missing person cases, dating back for decades that have never been solved. And this is where the story of J.C. Brown and a lost city comes into play. In 1904, J.C. Brown was a geologist working for the Lord Cowdrey Mining Company of London, but he was doing work at Mount Shasta. His incredible story was first told in 1934. He claims to have stumbled across a large man-made tunnel at the base of Mount Shasta, hiding behind a pile of rock that almost looked like a cave-in. The tunnel itself ran about 11 miles long, which isn't that strange when you remember that Mount Shasta is a volcano and filled with now empty lava tubes that can span for miles. This was a passage that was large enough to walk through and that led into chambers filled with strange artifacts, plates and tablets, metal objects, and even mummified remains. One room was a tomb that held the wrapped bodies of 27 giants that laid lined up in height ranging from 7 to 10 feet tall. Beyond this chamber, there were thin metal plates that laid stacked where copper spears and shields leaned against the stone. There were hieroglyphics and other artifacts in the room that made it seem like some sort of worship room, and inside this room, there were glow-in-the-dark statues. At first, C.J. Brown isn't sure what to do with his discovery, so he just covers it back up and left. But as the years went on, he couldn't stop thinking about the caves and his discovery, so he started to talk about it more and more. He talks about it so much that another trip gets planned, so he can show people the wonders he's discovered, and there are a small group of backers who go with him. The group was made up of about 80 different researchers and scientists and explorers, and together they would enter the tunnel and remove the artifacts for study. But on the day of the rendezvous, Brown failed to appear, and no one has heard from him since June 19, 1934. He just vanished without a trace, and his supposed tunnel has never been discovered. A lot of people thought that the whole story was just a hoax. Around this time, there was a lot of archaeology investigation happening in Egypt. In fact, King Tut's tomb had been discovered a little over a decade ago. So was Brown trying to pull a similar discovery? The hoax theory is great, except that Brown never received any money for this. Not to mention, the story doesn't stray far from other legendary stories connected to Mount Shasta about giants. Bigfoot sightings have been reported around Mount Shasta for decades, and the local indigenous oral traditions from groups such as the Shasta or the Wintu include accounts of unusually large people or giant figures that are tied to the mountains and its caves. Those threads, modern sightings, older tribal stories, and the talk of hidden chambers all feed into one another. And maybe this is connected to another idea. The idea that there was a lost city of a long-gone ancient civilization. James Churchward published a book called The Lost Continent of Mu in 1926, and it laid out a map and a narrative about a sunken Pacific civilization. His Mu material circulated through occult and New Age circles and offered a ready vocabulary for anybody looking to place an ancient, advanced people beneath a dramatic mountain peak. So Brown's tunnel claim fits very easily into that wider set of ideas. James Churchward is an engineer and a writer who spent a lot of time in India. He claimed that the information provided to him for his book series, The City of Mu, came from Nazca tablets shown to him by a Hindu priest, and from stone tablets that he had discovered in Mexico. He treated those tablets as the written record of the people of Mu. In his books are described a major advanced civilization, the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, from the lost city of Atlantis. with Atlantis being the governing society. Both of these societies were far more advanced than we are today, and at the time, they were both pretty peaceful, until the people from Atlantis became greedy, and they decided that they wanted to take control of everyone else on the planet. The Lemurians don't agree with this, and so they enter into a huge war with Atlantis that lasts for years. During this war, both societies attack each other with nuclear weapons. The war is so violent, and the results are devastating. Eventually, it's too much for the Earth. The destruction has caused tectonic plates to become unstable, and the Arctic poles to shift. After this, there is a catastrophic flood that covers most of the Earth, killing over 60 million Lemurians. The remaining people of Atlantis fled to an underground city called Agartha. As for the remaining Lemurian, approximately 25,000, they fled to a subterranean city called Telos, which, according to legends, is inside Mount Shasta. As for C.J. Brown, he did know of these stories. He actually gave frequent lectures on them, and he was convinced that he had found the refuge home Telos of the Lemurians. The people that had planned the expedition to find his cave thought so too. So while some people thought that this was a hoax and Brown, fearing he would be found out, fled, other people had different ideas. Some thought that he had been silenced by rival treasure hunters. Some believed that a secret society with orders to protect Telos killed him. And then there are others that say he didn't need the group because instead he had been granted access to enter Telos by the Lemurians, and he had been teleported into the mountain. In fact, there are some witnesses who claim to have seen a vehicle take Brown into the mountain, and that vehicle sounds a lot like a UFO. According to some witnesses, a large disc-shaped craft hovered near the mountain before beaming Brown up and flying into the mountainside. Not like a crash, but went right through it and into it. And this isn't where UFO sightings at Mount Shasta stop either. They have continued into present day. From the mid-20th century onward, Mount Shasta began to attract attention not only for its beauty, but for repeated reports of strange lights and aerial phenomenon. Local storytellers and early UFO enthusiasts collected accounts of glowing orbs and silent hovering objects seen above the snowline. The most common sightings are orbs or silent lights, bright small lights that move above the mountain. These are often seen entering the mountain as well. A widely circulated modern incident occurred on November 8, 2025. Witnesses were observing the sky recorded a bright point that moved erratically, then, according to their accounts, morphed into a translucent square with a pulsating purple circle at its center. It maintained that form intermittently and performed rapid, abrupt changes in direction for roughly 10 minutes before disappearing. The report was submitted to MUFON, M-U-F-O-N, and these investigators later characterized these cases as unknown light anomalies, noting that conventional aircraft, astronomical objects, or local light shows were not identified as the cause. The posting also caused caution that camera pixelations can make distant lights appear blocky or geometric when you're using phone footage. That all being said, weather and atmospheric conditions are the single biggest natural source of UFO misidentification around mountains like Mount Shasta. Phenomenon such as lenticular clouds, which look just like saucer-shaped UFOs, temperature aversions, and electrical discharges can create stationary, geometric, or glowing lights that appear to hover, change shape, or even enter the mountain. But just the same, the government is now admitting having evidence of UFOs and other alien-like objects in our atmosphere that they can't explain as weather, so maybe these stories aren't so far-fetched. But that still doesn't explain what happened to J.C. Brown. As it turns out, the Brown story may just be that, a story, and J.C. Brown was an alias. An investigative researcher, Stefan Sidoni, who predominantly studies the flat earth theory, spent years tracing down Brown and concluded that Brown is actually a man named John Benjamin Bodie. Employment records for the Lord Caudry Mining Company never listed anyone by the name of J.C. Brown, but they did have records for J.B. Bodie. According to Sidoni's research and local reporting, Bodie lived in Stockton and later retired near Mount Shasta, where neighbors recall public talks and lectures about Lemuria given by somebody who matched Brown's persona. Sidoni's work also pointed out that the Lemurian material Brown used wasn't original. Much of it had already been circulating for decades, especially through Frederick Spencer Oliver, whose 1899 book, A Dweller on Two Planets, introduced the idea of advanced Lemurians living in hidden sanctuaries beneath Mount Shasta. Later, writers like James Churchward explained the mythology with the lost continent of Mu, and by that time, Brown appeared in Stockton in 1934. These stories were already a part of the region's folklore. Brown's lecture echoed Oliver's theme so closely that researchers now see his version as a repackaging rather than a discovery. Oliver had claimed that the novel had been written by channeling messages he received through automatic writing while living in Yurka, just north of Shasta. Oliver's version of the Lemuria had become local folklore, repeated through occult groups, theosophists, and spiritual seekers that visited the mountain looking for signs of the ascended masters. So when J.C. Brown shows up in Stockton decades later, his story lined up almost beat for beat with Oliver's earlier material, and as it turned out, Bodie had actually lived not too far away from where Oliver had grown up. When you combine that with the Bodie identification, the real man living in the mountain, giving daily talks about Lemuria and matching Brown's mannerisms, the whole episode looks less like a vanished explorer and more like a local storyteller stepping into a ready-made mythos. And here's the thing about Mount Shasta. Once you start looking at the history, you realize it's not just a mountain, it's a magnet. For decades, it's pulled every kind of metaphysical seeker you can imagine. People come here chasing answers, chasing visions, chasing whatever it is they think lives just beyond the edge of ordinary life. And that's how we get into one of those most influential figures in Shasta's spiritual mythology, Saint Germain. If you've never heard the name, Saint Germain started as a real historical figure, an 18th century European nobleman with a reputation for being charming, mysterious, and maybe a little too good at showing up at the right place at the right time. Over the years, his legend has snowballed into something bigger, an immortal alchemist, a keeper of secret knowledge, a man who never seems to age. By the early 1900s, theosophists had fully adapted him as one of their ascended masters, these enlightened beings who supposedly guide humanity from behind the scenes. But the moment that ties him to Mount Shasta, the moment that changed everything, happened in 1930. A man named Guy Ballard was hiking on the lower slopes of the mountain when he met a stranger dressed in simple hiking clothes. The man offered him a drink from a cup of violet-tinged liquid and introduced himself as Saint Germain. According to Ballard, this wasn't just a friendly chat. It was a full mystical invitation, teachings, visions, revelations, all delivered by a figure who looked human but felt otherworldly. Ballard took that encounter and built an entire movement out of it. And whether you believe his story or not, that single meeting cemented Saint Germain as one of the central characters in Mount Shasta's spiritual mythology. It's the moment when the mountain shifted from being a place of legend to being a place where people believed the veil between worlds could actually open. Ballard and his wife Edna created what they called the I Am activity. It's a spiritual movement or cult based entirely on the teachings that they said Saint Germain had given them. And the way they told it, it wasn't just a mythical chat on a hiking trail. It was a divine appointment. Saint Germain had chosen Ballard to deliver a message to humanity, a message about ascension, purity, and the hidden hierarchy of enlightened beings guiding the world. And people believed them. Not just a handful of followers, but thousands. The IM activity exploded in the 1930s. They held massive conventions, published books, and taught that Saint Germain was actively working through them to uplift the world. Their followers wore white, they practiced strict spiritual discipline, and they believed that they were part of a cosmic mission. For a while, the movement was so big it even caught the attention of the US government. And whether you buy into Ballard's story or not, the impact is undeniable. The IM activity cemented Mount Shasta as a spiritual hotspot, not just for Lemurians or lost civilizations, but for anyone searching for signs of higher beings, hidden knowledge, or a doorway into something unseen. But not everyone who comes to Mount Shasta meets an ascended master or feels wrapped in cosmic light. Some people see something else entirely. They see shadow people. Now, if you spent any time in paranormal spaces online, you've probably run into this term before. Shadow people shows up everywhere: old houses, abandoned hospitals, lonely highways. But Shasta has its own version. And the reports here go back decades. Hikers, campers, even people who just pull off the highway for a break have described the same thing: tall, human-shaped silhouettes standing just inside the tree line that have no features or faces, just a dark outline that seems to be watching. One of the most circulated accounts comes from a group of hikers in the early 2000s who were camping near Panther Meadow. They said they kept seeing a figure standing between the trees at dusk, too tall to be a person, too still to be an animal. Every time they tried to get close, it slipped behind a tree trunk or vanished completely. Another widely shared story involves a man who was driving the Everett Memorial Highway late at night. He said a shadowy figure crossed the road in front of him, but when he stopped the car, there was nothing there, not even footprints. And here it helps to zoom out a bit, because shadowy figures at Mount Shasta aren't just a modern phenomenon on the internet. They sit on top of something much older, a supernatural framework that's been a part of the region long before hikers were posting about strange silhouettes online. Indigenous communities around Shasta have long described a presence of Akski, sometimes translated as pains. These aren't ghosts in a Hollywood sense. They're spiritual entities that can appear as small humans or animals, moving through the landscape in ways that don't follow the rules of the physical world. Atski are linked to illness, misfortune, and bad luck. In a lot of ways, they fill the same role that demonic forces do in Christian traditions. Not necessarily evil, but dangerous, unpredictable, and deeply woven into the natural environment. This worldview also includes the belief that the region is haunted by the spirits of accident victims and tulpas, thought-formed entities created by intense emotional or repeated storytellings. Drivers on Interstate 5 have reported seeing figures on the shoulder of the road that vanish when headlights hit them. Not ghosts with backstories, not apparitions reenacting a moment of death, just shapes, shadows, impressions of something that shouldn't be there. And then there are the glowing orbs. Early settlers and indigenous communities both describe lights moving along the slopes of the mountain, drifting, pulsing, sometimes rising straight up into the air. Today, those lights get folded into New Age interpretations or linked into secret rituals of so-called Great White Brotherhood. But the phenomenon itself is older than any of those groups. People have been seeing strange lights on Mount Shasta for generations. And the Great White Brotherhood isn't what it sounds like. The term itself comes out of the late 1800s theosophy, long before New Age movement took hold. In those teachings, the Great White Brotherhood wasn't a physical group at all. It was a council of enlightened, non-physical beings, white referring to light, not race, who were believed to guide humanity from a higher spiritual plane. They were overseers, the teachers, the ones who supposedly nudged human evolution forward from behind the scenes. So when early settlers and indigenous communities talked about glowing orbs drifting across the slopes, or lights rising straight into the air, theosophy folded those sightings into their worldview. To them, these weren't just strange natural phenomenon, they were manifestations, signs that the Brotherhood was active on the mountain. And that idea didn't stay theoretical for long. It's the same spiritual lineage that eventually shaped the IM movement. Right around the time that Shasta was becoming a hotspot for spiritual seekers, the mountain was also becoming a zone for one of the most famous cryptid waves in North America. And if you grew up anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, you already know the name that dominates those stories: Bigfoot. Now, Bigfoot sightings in North California didn't start at Shasta. They started over 100 miles west in Bluff Creek. In 1958, the logging site footprints and the Patterson-Gimlin film in '67. But once that footage hit national stage, the entire region changed. Suddenly, every unexplained howl, every oversized footprint, every shadow moving through the timberline had a name, and Mount Shasta, with its dense forests and deep lava tubes, became one of those places where people absolutely were convinced that the creature could be living. But here's the part that most people don't realize. Shasta's Bigfoot stories go back way earlier than the 1970s. Long before the Patterson-Gimlin film, long before the word Bigfoot ever existed, there were already reports of something huge and upright moving through those mountains. One of the earliest comes from 1850 during the gold rush. A miner working near Mount Shasta claimed that he watched a massive hairy creature walking on 2 feet stride right out of the tree line and smash a wooden sluiceway against a pine. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a trick of the light either, it was a bipedal giant. The story circulated amongst the miners in the region, and it stuck out because it matched what the indigenous communities had already been saying for generations: that there were large human-like beings living deep in the wilderness, rarely seen but impossible to mistake when they did appear. So by the time the modern Bigfoot craze hit in the mid-20th century, Mount Shasta wasn't starting from zero. It already had a century of sightings, rumors, and campfire retellings behind it. The 1970s just poured gasoline on that fire that had been burning since the gold rush. One story from 1979 starts out like an ordinary day. Just a father and his son at a campsite deep in the woods north of Weed. They had driven miles down a dirt road, far from the highway, far from anyone else, and settled in for the night. The son was sleeping in the bed of their pickup truck because his tent had mildewed. His father was in a small tent nearby. There was no fire, just a camp stove, and a crisp, moonless night. Around 3 in the morning, the son wakes up to something moving around their camp. At first, he assumes it's just his father, until the ice chest topples over with a crash. And there's no swearing, no fumbling, none of the sounds that he would have expected if his father crashed into it. And then something slammed into the side of the truck hard enough to rock it entirely. He said that it felt like he was being hit by another car. Before he could make sense of it, a scream tore through the dark, high-pitched, raspy, almost like a rabbit in distress, but louder, deeper, and nothing like any animal he'd ever heard in the woods. A moment later, his father unzipped the tent and asks if he was okay. Whatever had been there was gone already. When the morning came, the scene was unsettling. The camp was torn up, but nothing had been taken except for a full carton of eggs that had been sitting out on the table. They eventually found the carton tossed a short distance away, the lid ripped off, but no eggshells anywhere. The ice chest, which held most of their food, hadn't been touched. And on the side of the truck was a dent the size of a football, pushed in more than an inch. Now, a bear would have gone straight for the cooler. A person wouldn't have hit a truck hard enough to move it, and whatever made that scream didn't leave a single track in the pine needles. Stories like these have been reported constantly over the decades. In 2001, a man driving near the entrance of Castle Craig State Park said that he saw a massive upright figure standing in the creek just off the road. It wasn't splashing or running, it was literally just standing there, half lit up by his headlights as if it had been caught mid-step. By the time he pulled over to get a better look, the figure had already slipped back into the tree. Castle Craig is only about an hour from Shasta, and the terrain between them is nothing but dense forest and steep, rugged country. If something large was moving through that corridor, it wouldn't have been hard for it to stay hidden. Then in 2002, another report came from a ranch just outside of Yurka. The rancher saw a tall, dark figure cross an open meadow at dusk, far enough away that he couldn't make out the details, but close enough that he knew it wasn't a person. The stride was too long, the proportions were off, and the movement was smooth, not in a way that he was familiar with in any other animal local to the area. It crossed the field in seconds, and then it disappeared into the tree line without breaking its pace. Mount Shasta is one of those places where every story seems to bleed into the next. You can talk about Bigfoot, and before long someone brings up portals, which is a common theory connected to Bigfoot. But once portals are on the table, the conversation naturally drifts to another story, to UFO sightings, and from there, it's only a short jump to the disappearances. And one of the names that has always come up as part of that disappearance conversation is Carl Herbert Landers, a 69-year-old experienced runner. Carl was a disciplined athlete who trained regularly. He had climbed Shasta before, and in 1999, he wanted to go with 2 friends to make another summit attempt. Now, yes, he was 69, but he had recently climbed Mount Whitney, which is the highest peak in California, and he had hiked down the Grand Canyon, which requires the ability to handle the extreme heat and elevation. This time when he went, he brought with him 2 friends, Gaines and Gilmer, who were both experienced climbers themselves. The plan was pretty straightforward. They would acclimate at horse camp, and then they would continue towards the summit using the standard avalanche gluche route. Carl had been dealing with some altitude sickness as they climbed higher. Nothing dramatic, but it was enough that he was moving slower than usual. At one point, the group decided it made more sense for Carl to go ahead at his own pace while they followed behind. They weren't separating for long. They had agreed to meet at a very specific spot, the 50-50 plateau. The 50-50 area is a natural place to regroup. It's a wide, open section of the route where climbers stop to adjust their gear or rest or check conditions before the steep push towards Lake Helen. It's visible, it's easy to find, and it's one of the few places on that part of the mountain where you can actually see if someone is approaching from the distance. So Carl headed up towards the plateau, but when his friends arrived, Carl wasn't there. The stretch of avalanche gluche is open, exposed, and completely barren. There's no vegetation, there's no trees or even boulders, nothing big enough to hide behind. It's just rock, snowfields, and a long, unobscured line of sight. If someone is ahead of you, you can see them. If someone is behind you, you can see them. And there's nowhere to step off the trail without being visible. And that's part of what makes this case so unsettling. Carl's friends followed the same route he took, the only route available on that section of the mountain, and they never saw him. He wasn't ahead of them, not behind them, not off to the side. If Carl had slipped, sat down, or even stopped to rest, they would have been able to see him. If he had fallen off the main path, there would have been tracks or disturbed snow, but there was nothing. There simply isn't anywhere for a person to disappear to in that stretch. It's one of the reasons they felt comfortable splitting up for a short time. That landscape made it easy to keep track of each other. When they couldn't find him, they alerted authorities, and the search began almost immediately. Teams from multiple counties came in, experienced mountaineers, search and rescue crews, people who knew Shasta's terrain inside and out. They combed the route that Carl had taken and the areas above it, the areas below it, and the surrounding slopes. Helicopters even scanned the mountain from above. Ground teams spread out on the grids. They checked crevices, snowfields, every logical place a climber might end up, and they found no trace of him. No footsteps, no gear, no clothing, nothing disturbed, nothing dropped, nothing at all. It was as if Carl had stepped off the trail and simply wasn't there anymore. Mount Shasta has always had 2 ecosystems. There's the physical one, the forests, the lava tubes, the alpine slopes where the weather can turn on you in a minute. And then there's the other one, the one that's built out of stories and sightings and the things people swear they experience up here. The kind of metaphysical ecosystem where Bigfoot leads to portals, portals leads to lights in the sky, and those lights lead right back to the people who vanished without a trace. None of these stories stand alone. They overlap, they echo and fold into each other until the mountain feels like its own living mythology, one that keeps growing, no matter how many times people try to explain it away. Whatever you believe, folklore, the paranormal, or the psychological, Mount Shasta continues to create stories that challenge our understanding of the world around us. And maybe that's why those stories keep happening. Thank you for joining me down this crooked path today. I've been your host, Amanda Joy. Keep following those mysteries. Until next time.